So this week, I was reading from the book of Exodus, and there was something that kind of stuck out to me. It was the idea of the Sabbath. And so I began thinking a little bit more of what the Sabbath was and what it might look like in my life. And I came to some conclusions that helped me realize that I'm really not using the Sabbath in the way that I believe it was intended. Well, let me back up. So here's the story, the part that I was reading that sparked some of these thoughts. Moses had led his people into the wilderness. And while they are there, they're hungry. And there's no food in the desert. And so they're asking God, or probably better, where they were more like whining to God, saying, well, where are we going to get food? How are we going to survive? And God gives them some things. One of those things was manna. And he gave them some direction. He said, all right, every morning you're going to wake up and there's going to be this manna on the ground. And you're going to gather just enough for the day. Just enough for each person to have, and it will sustain them for the entire day. And so that's what the people did. They would get up in the morning, they'd gather this manna, and then they would use it throughout the day. But then some people gathered more than what they needed. And when this happened, the next morning, all of that extra that they gathered spoiled. It began to smell bad and had maggots in it after only a day. But then, a little later in the week, God told them, now, tomorrow is Sabbath. And what that means is you're not going to work. You're not going to do anything on that day. And so there will be no manna on the Sabbath. So now go out and gather twice as much as normal because you need enough for today and tomorrow. And now this time when the people went out and gathered more, they gathered twice as much. This time that next morning, there were no maggots. It wasn't spoiled. It was just as good the second day as it was the first. And so that just got me thinking, like, this is kind of odd. Like, how can food that you get one day only last a day, but then you get it a different day and it lasts 2 days? Well, there was definitely some kind of divine intervention. I mean, we know that anyway with just the concept of the manna being there, but there was some divine intervention about this idea of the Sabbath. And then God tells the Israelites that the Sabbath, this rest, was a gift to them. This rest was a gift. And so I began thinking, what does the Sabbath look like for me? What does this gift look like for me? And you know, one thing when it comes to the idea of a Sabbath is the gift has to be taken. You see, there's many times that I want to keep going, I want to keep doing, or I've got so many things on my plate that I've got to deal with, and that this idea of a rest, even though it might sound good and it might be a desire that I have, I'm like, it's not possible. It's not feasible for me to be able to have a time of rest because there's too much going on, and I reject the gift of the rest. Now, I was doing a different study earlier, and when I was doing this other study, the person was also talking about Sabbath, and they mentioned that what we need to do is we need to kind of refocus our lives and make it around the idea that rather than we rest from work, we need to work from our rest, making this idea of Sabbath and the rest very essential to who we are. And again, I come back to this idea, but that's just not possible. I don't have enough time for me to rest in that kind of way. But then God brought a different idea to my mind, the idea of tithing. Now, this is something that I have experienced. This is something that I've seen play out in other people's lives. I've seen played out in my family, and I've seen played out in my life. And so I believe it. That, see, when we tithe, when we take the 100% of what we have and give a tithe of it to God, that 90% that we're left with actually satisfies us more than the 100% ever could. That we are more taken care of with the 90% than we are with the 100%. And that has come about in so many different ways. Sometimes God just provides extra blessings. Sometimes it feels like some of the things I have or that my family's had, they just last longer. Sometimes God literally gives us an extra blessing of money on top of what we normally have because we needed it. But when we submit to Him in this idea of tithing, knowing and trusting Him to take care of us with only part of what we earn, we find out that we are more taken care of, more satisfied, and more complete with 90% as opposed to 100%. And like I said, I've experienced that in my life, and so I believe it. But I think that same concept applies with the Sabbath as well. Even though I haven't really felt like I've experienced it in this way, this is what I want to work on. This is what I want to try to connect with. The idea that taking a time of Sabbath will actually allow me to get more done, be more filled, be more usable for the kingdom than if I tried to work for 7 straight days. Now, I know this isn't necessarily going to be easy, and I might need to take some baby steps to get there. But maybe I just need to make sure that I'm taking, 20 minutes after my kids go to bed to just rest. Now, I don't want us to get confused with rest and relaxing because I don't think they're exactly the same thing in this case. I love relaxing. I love to have that time to myself. But I think resting here is much more about us getting into the heart of God, of connecting our spirit with His Spirit and being able to be filled up with His power by resting in Him. You see, I think this idea of Sabbath rest is much more about connecting who I am to who God is. Connecting my will and my desires and making them conform to God and His will and His desires for me. And by doing this, I take on the heart of God. And when I'm following His path and I'm taking these moments of rest, of Sabbath, then His power is able to fill me back up and I can work out of that refilling. And so maybe I can't take a full day, at least not right now. I don't understand how I could do it, but I can take some. I can take some specific time to rest. And I know this is a big deal for a lot of people. We get so busy in the activities that we're a part of, so busy in our sports, in our extracurricular activities, so busy in our school, so busy in our relaxing that we forget to take times of Sabbath, to take times of rest and reconnecting with our Father. And so it's no wonder that there's many times in my life when I feel weak, I feel broken, I feel like I can't keep going. And I believe that's because I haven't allowed God to refill me. I'm trying to find some rest from the work that I'm doing, as opposed to resting and working out of the fulfillment of that rest. And it comes down to trust. Just like I have to trust God with my tithe, that 90% is going to be worth more than 100. I've got to believe that giving time to God to allow Him to refill me will actually be more beneficial and allow me to accomplish more things that are needed and feel more fulfilled and rested than working all 7 days. So what is it for you with this idea of Sabbath? First, do you take a Sabbath? Do you actually take time to stop? Do you take time to listen? Do you take time for a day, or do you just take moments? And maybe moments are all that you feel like you have time for right now. And so I'd encourage you, do that. But set aside some time specifically to rest, to have a time for God to refill you. Maybe it's for 20 to 40 minutes after you put the kids to bed. and that you get a chance to read and sit with God and listen. And maybe it's when you wake up in the morning, maybe before your kids wake up or before your alarm goes off, you're able to get up and rest with God, allow Him to refill you. Maybe it's just you need to take 5 to 10 minutes at a specific time during the day, getting rid of all distractions and just ask God, speak to me, fill me with your Spirit, and then just sit quietly in His lap. Whatever way you need to take this first step of rest, I'd encourage you to do so. Allow God's power of the Sabbath to be displayed in your life, as I'm trying to allow the power of the Sabbath to work in mine.